Tonight we get to speak with Dr. Anica. I have never met her in person, but our best friend Javon is close friends with her, and they've been doing things over the last couple weeks. And just every time I hear her and she shares, it's just incredible insight. And so Javon hooked us up, and she's going to share her wisdom and her advice and the way she just can communicate all these different things that seem really, really heavy. She really has helped me be able to kind of step into things that I didn't really fully understand. So I'm going to read her bio because I think that it'll help y'all kind of know that just her background. It says, Dr. Anica is a licensed clinical psychologist based in New York City. Dr. Anica combines her passion for race and diversity with years of clinical training and experience through her company, which is Race Positive. The goal is to engage, empower, and equip people to dismantle all forms of racism, prejudice, and bias in their unique spheres of influence. In addition to workshops centered on educating people on issues of race, such as privilege and systematic racism, she has been hosting a series of race talks centered on various race-related topics, such as racial trauma, cultural appropriation, the difference between intent and impact, which I think is huge, how to talk to kids about racism. To learn more, she has a website, actually. It's www.dranica.com. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to go over some really big topics and really dive into what we have. So I'm going to bring her on. Let's see. Yeah. Let's wait. Hi. How you doing, Dr. Anica?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna turn my volume up just a smidge. Thank you so much. I was just telling everyone watching that we have never met in real life, which is funny, which is like the world right now, right? We just
exactly.
Do what we gotta do. I think I've like made deeper relationships in this quarantine time than I have in a really long time. And
yeah.
So I think it's intentional of God in a way of where he's like weaving us together, not based on who we see every day, but furthering it out, you know?
Yeah, and the intentionality that it takes, right, to build is really good.
Yes, I was just sharing about that you're a psychologist and you're in New York City. Will you tell us a little bit about your race positive, do you call it a foundation or what do you call it?
I just call it like a consulting firm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Will you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. So, it was birthed out of my passion to talk about race relations. And I just felt that so often conversations around race devolve into something very negative and unproductive. And as a psychologist, I firmly believe in the power of talking, right? I think healing comes when we talk. And as a result of that, I thought, well, if we can just get everyone together in a room where we can just honestly but positively talk about these issues, we have the ability to truly bring about change. Because I think that through listening, we're able to gain understanding. Through that understanding, we have insight and empathy. Through that empathy and insight, we can have collaboration. And through the collaboration, we can have meaningful, lasting change. And I often, we'll hear people, they'll say, oh, positive, that just means it's passive or everything is and wonderful. And that's not what it means at all. Positive just means that I believe that you are a person that God created, and therefore you are inherently valuable. And I need to regard you in that manner. I don't have to like what you say. I don't have to agree with what you say. But the manner in which I speak to you and the manner in which we communicate has to be a positive one, because you're a person deserving of that respect. And so that's sort of the tone that we have. But we have very hard, very honest, very raw conversation. But what I love so much about our race talks, which we typically have quarterly in person, but because of COVID, we've moved online. We had one last week actually, and we're going to have another coming up this Saturday. And for the one last week and the one this Saturday, they're both free. Usually there's a $20 cost to it, but we're making it free because, again, everyone's at home, and I just think we need a space to talk. It's needed, and I feel like that is one way I can support the community, is by making this available to anyone who wants to be a part of it. But last week we talked, it was only for people of color, and my heart with that was just wanting to create a space where people of color who are living with a lot of this day in and day out can come together and just share and just talk about what exactly is racial trauma and how is it impacting their lives and their functioning. And the one that we've got coming up on Saturday, which is the 20th, is for everyone. And usually our race talks are open to everyone. We have everybody represented from every racial group, which I'm so very proud of. And so, again, I'm hoping that that gets replicated in our online event on Saturday. But we're going to talk about the fact that racism is real, and now what? Right? Because so much of the
That's
debate,
the big question, right?
Right? Because so much of the debate for so long has been about, is it real, is it not real? Now I think we can all agree it's real. Now what do we do with that information? And so that's sort of the heart behind it.
I love that. I think the big thing that I love, what you said, and I've read about it, I've been to your website and stuff, is that especially right now, I think it's hard for a lot of us, like when we're scrolling through social media and we're seeing people that are posting things that are against like what we are believing or we're fighting for. I think it's really hard to know how to respond and how to do it. But I think it goes back to like seeing them as God's children as well, and like to have a real dialogue, right? Like no one is going to change. Like when my little girl's crying and screaming, if I cry and scream at her, nothing happens.
Right.
But if I like get down on her level and be calm, which sometimes I don't and sometimes I do, I'm learning that as well. But when I can be calm and like speak to her in a way, it dissolves the situation. We can then figure out what she needs, and then I can help her. You know, I think we sometimes operate of that like frustration and anger, but maybe I feel like God is sometimes saying, okay, wait, maybe call that person, maybe message them separately. I don't know, that could be a whole another hour long, how to like talk to people on social media. But I want to get into what we're going to talk tonight, because we're talking about a lot of big topics. And I think that the last couple of weeks when we've had Javon, I think it's been really good because we've rooted ourselves like in scripture. We've rooted ourselves in like why as Christians we are called to speak out and to act out in the love of Jesus's children and God's children. And so I love that we have that as our foundation. And today we're going to intertwine that as well. But I think that there's some really big things that people, we're seeing a lot of posts, we're seeing a lot of like memes and pictures and things of like racism and microaggressions and racial trauma and stuff. But I think I'm so excited to hear from you to kind of educate us on like further, like not taking it past just like a screen, because I think that there has to be that dialogue to really further the conversation. When you and Jerome were talking this last week, I love the story you told about the fence. Would you mind sharing that?
Sure. So oftentimes when people hear the word white privilege, they often respond in a defensive way, particularly white people, right? They respond in a defensive way by talking about all the ways that they did not feel privileged. You talk about all the ways that they've struggled and worked hard for what they've earned, or all the things that they have had to overcome in order to achieve what they have. And I think that the word privilege in itself can be a misnomer because it implies ease. It implies that there was no effort put into it. And that's not what it means at all. And the way that I described it when I was talking to Javon, I was saying, imagine two kids are behind a very, very high wall, but one of them is standing on a box. And though he's standing on the box, he still cannot see over the wall. So what he does is he tiptoes, and it takes some effort and some strain, but through tiptoeing, he's able to see over the wall successfully. Another kid is standing flat on the ground, and he's tiptoeing. He's looking at the other kid, and he's like, oh, I can do that. And so he starts tiptoeing too. But despite his effort, he cannot see over the wall. So he starts jumping. And so he jumps, and with little spurts, he sees over the wall, but nothing in a sustained way like the other kid. The other kid who's standing on the box, tiptoeing, seeing over the wall, looks over to the kid jumping and saying, why are you jumping? Like, I don't understand what your problem is. I'm tiptoeing. I don't understand why you can't tiptoe too. And clearly it's working for me. It's your fault that you're not seeing over the wall. Now, anyone watching that scenario would think it's laughable because it's clear to everyone watching that the reason this kid is able to look over the wall by his tiptoeing alone is because he has the assist of the box. But because the box is invisible to him, he's only giving credit to his tiptoeing effort for why he's successful in looking over the wall. And because he's invisible, the box is invisible to him, he's unaware that this other kid is lacking a box that he has. And white privilege is that box, and the tiptoeing is personal responsibility. So you'll often hear lots of white people pointing to their effort and to their personal responsibility, taking advantage of the opportunities and all the things that were given, that, you know, that they are aware of having, and making good usage of that. But they'll credit that only for their success, aka looking over the wall, and they'll judge other people their inability to really fully see over the wall in a consistent way as effort, as a sign that they haven't tried enough, that their effort has not been up to par, without acknowledging that, dude, you're standing on a box. Yes. And others don't have access to the same box. And it's that inequity that causes so much of the disparities that we see in our country.
Yeah, and I think that it's such like a visual for me. Like when you were saying, you could just see it. And it sounds almost silly, like you're saying, like when you're hearing that scenario, you would see that, you kind of laugh. Like the fact is, like, that is a very real thing that is happening in America. And Chris and I always talk about this. I think it's really hard for like the white culture, the white race culture, however you want to describe it. A lot of times we are in our bubbles, right? And so it's hard to like put yourself in that position. You know, I've been married to Chris for almost 7 years. We've dated 10 years. I lived in New York. So I've lived in a lot of diverse areas. And so it's a little bit easier for me to see that, you know, over, but that's like 10 to 12 years of me being exposed to it, you know? Yeah. And so that's where I'm like, okay, we have to have the grace on each side. Like, just like how you're saying that story. Like, it's like almost like allowing them to like open their eyes, because they don't know sometimes. And then when they do know, they're choosing maybe not to even notice it. Like to not notice, like, no, you're fine. Just how you were saying the little boy was like, you're fine. You can just jump. And I think that that's where we do a disservice to when we're choosing to partner with that is their choice to not have a box, we're missing the point completely.
Absolutely. And you may even hear that the fear that acknowledging that you have a box will somehow invalidate your effort tiptoeing. And it does not. Yes. They're actually mutually exclusive. They have nothing to, one doesn't cancel out the other. You can be privileged and still work hard, right? Again, another sort of silly example could be you get a job because your dad owns the company, but you worked really hard, and that's why you've been promoted to vice president. And it would be unfair for people to assume that you were given the title of vice president only because your dad owned the company. But you would also be mistaken to assume that you would have just walked in there and had the opportunity to be vice president if your dad did not own the company. And it's being able to hold those two things as true in your mind is what really helps, I think, people to move forward in understanding what white privilege is and how it does have very, very real impact on how we all live.
And I think it's just also the like the humbling of ourselves, you know, the humbling mentality of like, let me just step out of how I'm seeing this and look from the different perspective. We could also talk on white privilege forever. And I think that when a lot of people, when white privilege comes up, that how you were saying, like they get defensive or they get like, it's like, wait, but that's not me. And that's not, like, I've done all this. But then sometimes when it finally does click, then it moves into another area of like shame or guilt. And then you're like, then you feel shame and guilt for feeling shame and guilt because Black people have been like suffering for so many years. And so how can you kind of talk through like how maybe we could work through that?
Yeah. So I think, guilt is an interesting emotion, right? And I think we feel it when we become aware that we have offended or done something that was wrong to another person, to God, if you're a believer, to yourself. And it brings this awareness. The awareness of that offense is what creates the guilt. But for me, the emotion isn't the problem. It's what you do with the emotion that becomes problematic. And for some white people, when they become aware of their privilege and they feel that guilt, again, because of the awareness, they can do a couple of things. One, they can withdraw into themselves and say, this is too much. I feel overwhelmed. I didn't ask for any of this. I had nothing to do with slavery or any of the things that came after it. And it's not fair that I am being held responsible. And so this is too much and I can't fix it. It's beyond me. So they just kind of opt out of talking about it. They opt out of doing anything about it because the guilt feels too much. And because of the privilege that comes with whiteness, they're able to recede into an environment that spares them from having to think about it any further. Another response is anger, where they get very upset and they feel as though it's you're making me feel this way. It's because you are pointing out my privilege, or you are making me aware of things I didn't have to truly think about before. You must be the reason that I feel this guilt. And so they kind of throw it back at the person and make them responsible for the emotion, and then throw all of their anger toward them. And again, as I said earlier, start pointing out all the ways that they struggle. They're deserving of what it is that they were doing. You know, and yet another example is people who feel the guilt and they're like, okay, I was not on board with all these injustices that were done on my behalf. They did it without my consent. No one asked me. And if they did, I would have said no. But since it was done and I'm benefiting from it, I feel awful and I don't want to do harm to the world. I need to go in and just like save Black people. I can rescue them from racism. And rather than being like Jesus, they try to be Jesus. And so they take on this responsibility, right? And they go into the community and they work hard and they give and they give and they give. And then you know that it's a guilt-driven behavior rather than a love-driven behavior, because the minute that those people don't express gratitude, they don't act like, oh my gosh, you came in and you fixed my life, you made me so much better, thank you, white person. You get upset. You start getting very self-righteous and very indignant, like, how dare you not realize that I did not have to descend to this state and come to the world, but yet I have. You know. And so they get upset and they walk away with this sort of, you know, like, you can't help people because they're not grateful. And you realize that it was coming out of this sense of guilt. And I don't think any of those responses are helpful. I don't think you need to feel guilty about your whiteness. You didn't ask to be white any more than I asked to be Black. It just is. The skin color is not the problem. The problem is the inequity, the value that we put on one skin over another in our society. That's where the problem lies. The problem comes from our society saying one group is better because of their skin color and another group is worse because of their skin color, regardless of who they are as people or what they've done or haven't done for society. That's where the problem lies. So my response to your question would be, recognize the guilt as a legit and an appropriate emotion that comes with an awareness, that comes with realizing whether intentional or no, I have participated in something that is harming other people. What do I want to do with it? What I want to do with it, I want to then realize with this privilege, I now have a responsibility. The responsibility isn't to go in and to save Black people from racism. The responsibility is to use my privilege in spaces of whiteness to make sure that those methods and those spaces are no longer kept only for white people, that I'm using my privilege to make it more equitable and fair and accessible for everyone, for people who've long been kept out of it. So that means rather than going into the Black and brown community to help them deal with the oppression that they're facing, I'm going into my church, I'm going into my workplace, I'm going to my community board, I'm talking to the HOA, I'm looking to see, wait, who are our neighbors? We have no people of color in our neighborhood, in our cul-de-sac. Why is that? Is it because it's cost prohibitive? Why is it cost prohibitive? Why do we have costs so high that a diverse group of people can't afford to be here? Who gets to come to speak at our church? And why do they get to speak at our church? We have a country club. Why is it that only one group of people seem to be serving and the other group is being served? Is there a reason? Like, what is it? Have we thought about reaching out to other groups and inviting them personally, giving discounts, and maybe just offering them an invitation to come and tour our facility? What efforts have we made? That's how you use your privilege to push for equity in the world, not going into Black and brown spaces to save them from it. You see it as a collaboration, that you have a role, they have a role.
That is so good, because I think that, and there's nothing wrong with serving. Like I think there's a time and place for
Of
that,
course.
you know. And I mean, that's, God calls us to serve. But I think I love that what you were saying is like, we need to look in like our circles of life, because if we just go to a Black and brown community, like we are not actually affecting and making change in our community where it's predominantly white. And even like your churches, like I think this is the time, like this is the time to have those conversations. And those are things that, like, as with our privilege, like people will listen.
Yes, they
right?
will. Yes,
You know, I love that. I think that's so good. I think that the other thing I love that you said was, and our pastor's wife said something similar to this the other day, is like, if this is rooted in any way, like trying to make changes in us because like we want to be righteous, we want to do the right thing, although that seems really good, like that's not going to get us, so that's only going to get you so far. That righteousness will get weary and fall out. But if we're doing it in true love,
yes,
like, because Jesus's children are not getting just love from the world, like if we're doing it through that love, like that love sustains, because that love grows, it doesn't diminish in this capacity. And so I think that's rooting ourselves in that, I think, is an incredible place. And also hugely is to look at your inner circle. Pastor Javon even said that a couple weeks ago, is like, you are put where you're at for such a time as this. Like if you look around, everyone's white. You were put here because everyone was white, right? And you're learning all this stuff, but like you can really make a change. Like I'm like really pumped about that, because that had already been on my mind, but just the way you describe that, I think, is that white savior complex is always what I'm afraid for people to kind of jump into. And I think it's easy because we do, like, when you see someone hurting, you want immediately to go and fix them and help them.
Right. But I think,
not bad.
And it's not a bad one, like you're saying, to want to serve and to want to jump. And there is room for you to do what you can. There are organizations you can donate to. You can give of your time. If you have expertise in certain things, you're a lawyer, you can help, you know, represent some of the people protesting who have been arrested. You can do all those wonderful things. But I think this idea of, I need to go in, be a missionary and go into these Black and brown communities to save them from racism, fundamentally shows a misunderstanding that racism was not created by Black and brown people. Therefore, we don't have the power to undo it. It was created by white people. We're just having to deal with it. And so your best place of influence in being able to really help change the tide is to go into those white spaces that you're allowed into freely, and then really use that privilege that you have there to talk about how to create a more equitable, a more just world. It does not have to be mutually exclusive. I'm not saying pick one. I'm saying, how about we approach both? And if you're not able to do both, I would recommend that you start with your one circle.
I love that.
Let other people deal with the
I think so. It's so good. It's so good. I think that will be long lasting, because then you have a chance. I think this is really cool. You have a chance every single day to do something, as opposed to volunteering one day a week where you go into that community. It is now going to be like a filter that we should have on our eyes, that every single day there's an opportunity to point out, like, at your job, like, why is there only one Black person, or why is there no one of other ethnicity here, or, you know, at your country, how you were saying, all those different areas. Like, that is just such a good takeaway of, like, every single day we can take a choice to step into that role that God has given us, to speak out and to use our privilege for good and not to feel the guilt and shame. I want to go into microaggressions, because this is really this is the other thing that I keep seeing on Instagram, is like examples of microaggression. Will you kind of explain what that is for people that don't know?
Yeah, so racial microaggressions are these everyday insults, invalidation, slights that are often directed toward a particular racial group, and it's typically negative. It can have a positive sound, but it has a very negative impact. And a way that I try to describe it is, if I were to cut your arm off, that would be an obvious offense, right? It would be clear to everyone that I have just injured you. But if I pinch you, then I could be like, I didn't pinch you. I don't. And you're like, but you did. My arm is stinging. You did pinch me. You're like, I was just walking. I don't really know why you're being. And so that would leave you feeling like, did I really get pinched? Was I?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being sensitive. Maybe, okay, fine. Okay, fine. It's not a big deal. And then I come back and I pinch you again in the same spot. And I keep pinching you in the same spot for 40 days on end. After a while, the damage and the hurt that you feel from those pinches will probably be greater than that severed arm that happened that one time. And what we see in the research is that racial microaggressions have a huge connection to physical and psychological just difficulties. So from the physiological side, it's connected to things like obesity, diabetes, hypertension. It's connected to the psychological side with anxiety, depression, low work performance, suicidality, all those sorts of things. And I really want to point out here that a microaggression is very different from somebody being rude, which is how oftentimes people will dismiss it. That's just a guy being rude, or he's just a jerk. You know, when he said that you speak really good English for an Asian person, he was just that's just Bob being insensitive. But that's very different. That particular statement from Bob is very different from Bob walking in the common room and not saying good morning to everyone. That's an act of rudeness. But the racial microaggressions have a more sinister impact, that it has greater effect and a more lasting, deeper cut than somebody being rude. And that the data is right there supporting that. So it's not the same as someone being rude. It has a different level of impact on the recipient. And again, even if it's quoted in something that sounds positive, yes, like you're so articulate, or you know, you are a credit to your race. I just, you know, if more Black people were like you, I think things would be so much better. Like there's an implication here that Black people are not articulate and they're not good, and therefore this exception narrative is to be applauded, right? So it's rooted in a sense of inferiority and dismissal of an entire group of people, even if it sounds positive. Yeah. And so it's really important that people realize that for the person doing it, they can easily sort of swat it away by either highlighting that it wasn't their intention or saying that what they said was misinterpreted. And because it's slight, because it's an everyday common offense, it's very easy for those listening to say, I think you're being insensitive. I think, Aubrey, I don't think that's what he meant, you know? And they start invalidating your experience, and then you start questioning yourself if what you experienced really did happen. But when you find that the same thing keeps happening over and over, there's a deep hurt that boils in you, and perhaps it comes out in rage that, again, even that rage can get invalidated. Like, whoa, okay, fine. So he crossed the street when he saw you walking. I get that that was a rude, but you are like way upset right now. But yeah, you've been having people do that all day for the past 40 days. Yes, at some point.
Yes, you're gonna explode.
Having a reaction, you know. And so again, those sorts of things are all experiences that I think people will just look at, and because again they're common and they're everyday, they could be easily dismissed and not fully understood as harmful, and they actually are quite harmful.
Yeah, I just think a lot of times then people, how you were saying, they react to their reactions, like and I think that's important to say, like if someone's reacting, it's probably not the first time that Black person has experienced that frustration or that like whatever it is. Like I think that's super important to know that. I when I was flipping through like on Instagram yesterday, I was seeing there was a list of like microaggressions, and one of them, I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, I have done this. Like I'm like, I have a Black husband and I have done one of these, and it'll make sense in a second why I said it. But it's it was for biracial kids. Whenever you're like, oh, what are you mixed with? Like, oh, and I like truly felt like I was always so curious. And even like now with my kids being biracial and mixed, like my husband just said, how dare you? He's joking. But but it really, for me personally, it was always a thing of like, I was just curious, but I realized I'm like, and I always thought it was like a compliment. No, I didn't even think it was a compliment or not. I just was like really curious, I guess, you know? And I look at that, I'm like, dang, I'm like, how sad. Like I would never want my kids to feel inferior or to question their race or to feel like they're like a puppy or like a random like or exotic creature. Like exotic is beautiful, right? Exotic is cool, but like I was like, it really hit me, and I was like, my girls, like I had to like repent of that and to
Mm.
like, but I just love that like even yesterday I was learning. Like we're like none of us, all of us are on this journey of learning. So it doesn't matter where we're at. Like we still have to assess like where we're at. And like I think now we're all kind of hyper aware, or at least most of us are. And I'm catching myself sometimes thinking things that I didn't even really realize that were microaggressions, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's
And
huge.
I think just recognizing what you said, like we're all learning. This is
Yeah.
not, this is a marathon. We've been hearing that. It's not
Yes.
a sprint.
Yes.
And I said this in my talk to Javon. I said, no one's quizzing you. Like there's no big test to come.
Yeah.
We're all learning this is for understanding. And so
Yeah.
every day we have the opportunity to encounter something that deepens our understanding, takes us a bit further. So, I mean, just a little example, if I'm driving on the FDR and I see someone pulled over by a police officer, rather than automatically thinking, oh my gosh, what did he do?
Uh-huh.
And assuming that the person being pulled over is automatically guilty of some unknown crime, perhaps I can now think, oh my God, I hope he's okay. I hope that there is an appropriate reason for that stop. I hope
Yes.
that goes well. Maybe I need to just kind of keep an eye out in case any assistance or support is needed, I can offer it. So rather than automatically assuming guilt and culpability and criminality on the part of whoever it is in that car, I have to change the way that I'm thinking and seeing that situation. And so again, there are all these ways that we have opportunities to learn and to grow. And I think that's what makes us better. That's what makes us able to grow and to really be who God has called us to be. We're constantly evolving, constantly learning, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes when we think we've learned enough and we want to opt out. The problem becomes when we get that information and we use it as a weapon to attack others whose lived experiences are different from ours, or who we feel are undeserving of grace or love or anything like that. That's why it becomes problematic. But we are actively all learning on this journey. And the more you know, the more responsibility you have to use that information well to create what I think is God's desire, which is a just and equitable world.
Yeah, amen. I think that God's been pointing out to me the last couple of days about habits and how, you know, our hope and our ideas that we're wanting to make changes, right? But I think our habits are still there, and those have maybe been there for many years. And like when the habit comes up, think of it as sin. Like as long as we like repent of that and move on, like God has forgiven, and we can keep going. Like it may take 10 to 20 to 30 times of you doing that one habit to break it, but it doesn't mean when you do it one time that then you just forget about it. I think it's the intentionality.
Absolutely. And just recognizing, look, oh crap, I screwed up again. That's because I still have work to do. That's information to keep learning. It's not an indictment. You know, it's not evidence that you need to quit. It's like, no, I need to continue with this. And the same way, like you were saying with sin, when we become aware of our sin, hopefully we're not running away from God, we're running to him, because awareness of our sin makes us aware of our need to press in, to go deeper, to rely on him all the more. It draws us toward him. And so in the same way, when you realize I still have that prejudice, I still have that bias lean, I still think that way, or I still have this, whenever that black guy walks toward me, I'm still tensing up. Even if I'm no longer crossing the street, I'm still tensing up. That's an awareness that you can say, okay, I need to be a little bit, I have to do a better job of that. What can I do to help me with that? And now you're actively putting yourself in spaces where there are a lot of black men. Well, you could opt out of doing it, but because you're aware, I don't like that tension that I feel. I want to push past that. You press into it, you lean into it. And now, you know, 2 years from now, you pass a black guy, you're not even fazed by it. You need to recognize that he was walking because you're so intent on just enjoying your day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that happened to me in New York. When I grew up in Sugar Land, Texas, which is a predominantly, I mean, it's very diverse now, but it's still diverse, segregated in a way, I would think, you know, for the most part. And I remember, so we always used to call it the bubble. Like we grew up in the bubble, and I moved to New York, and I remember, you know, just all of a sudden being flooded with all this diversity and loved. And my mom, always in our household, we always talked about diversity. We were always surrounded by that, and my grandmother. And so like diversity was always something like we were familiar with and always talked about. So I'm so thankful for my parents for doing that. so that when I went to New York and I saw even more of it like in real life, I just became even hyper aware of like, I always heard the stories of people clutching their purses and stuff. And so I remember so specifically, like and this was like to the extreme, which I'd be like, I was trying to be like as normal as possible and be like lay my purse on the floor and like, like be super chill. And I was like, okay, now this person thinks I'm trying too hard. But I was just like, I want you to know that like, I see you as a human, like, I was like, I want to give you a hug, but that's weird, and I think that a lot of people I know right now are kind of in that phase. And now I'm what, 8-10 years down the road, but I think also that there's a side of where people are, there's this heightened awareness of Black people and they just want to like hug and love on every person, which is like the sweetest thing, but do not do that.
It's
like
a little weird.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like I've heard stories where people like, this one lady I follow on Instagram, she's like, and someone offered to buy me my groceries, and she's like, that's offensive. Like I can buy my own groceries. Mm-hmm. So even in that, like when we are like now so aware and we've had this awakening, like it doesn't mean that you need to hug every Black person. It doesn't mean that
I wouldn't even hug every Black person. I don't know you.
And I'm like, the heart is so good, and I'd rather that than the other side. But just, I thought that was a funny story of just like, God will work that out too. Like how you were saying, like when you go and get into that, maybe you get around all these Black men and you finally feel comfortable. Like it takes you stepping outside your box, exactly. And putting yourself in situations like almost like training. It's like training yourself, which sounds so crazy to train yourself to be around a different race. Like even just saying that sounds crazy, but we're in a crazy world, and this is kind of where we're at,
And again, I don't think it has to be okay. Where all the Black people?
Yes.
Go, like jump in and be in the middle of it in order for me to overcome my prejudice. I don't. I think it truly can be. You know what? I'm aware that this is a thing that I struggle with, and so what can I do to help me combat that? I'm going to read some more books. I'm going to start reading about characters who are Black that are good and whole and well-rounded, and kind of change my internalizing and my understanding of how Black people can be, and the variations and the diversity that exists within the Black community. We're not a monolith. We're not all the same. And that's important, because you leaving your purse on the ground, I would never do that. I don't care how many Black people are present.
Yes.
It's still New York City, and people steal. I don't care.
It was crazy. Right? It was crazy.
So you don't have to sort of like let go of all reason and all sort of, appropriate social behaviors.
Not do that.
In order to prove how cool you are with people.
Yes.
People too. Some are great, some are not so great. We're not asking that Black people be put on a pedestal. We're just saying, can they be treated as equitably as white people are? And again, when it comes to privilege, the way that I define it is that white privilege says that as a white person, your intelligence, your beauty, your capability, your talent, all those things are assumed. They are assumed about you upon entering. And it takes you opening your mouth or doing something really dumb to prove otherwise, right? Yeah. For me as a Black person, those things are not assumed. My intelligence, my beauty, my effort, my capability, those things are not assumed. It then takes my words and my actions to then prove that those things are the case. And even then, you have some who are suspicious. Do you know what I mean? It's that assumption and that error in assuming that's problematic. So when we're talking about equity, we're not talking about elevating Black people above white people. We're just saying, can we too have the assumption of goodness, and let us, by our behavior, by our words, lead you to consider or reevaluate that. Don't put it upon us to disprove your assumption that we're bad. That's where it becomes a problem. So no, you don't need to go into all the community and hug every Black person. But what you do need to do is recognize that just like they're great white people, they're great Black people. Just like there are some white people you'll never leave a penny next to because they will take it. You wouldn't do that with some Black people. We just want the same sort of treatment. That's all it is that we're asking for.
I think that's so good. And I think that even how you were saying, like movies, for me, some people's books, some people's articles, and it's different, or following people on Instagram. For me, it's like movies. We watched Brian Banks, I think that's what it's called. Brian Banks the other night. It's about a football player. It's based on a true story. But I was like, this is a movie, just like there's so many movies out there, but it really just shows you like a Black man, just like how he got into a situation that he wasn't even guilty of. And it just shows like the human side of it. And so I created a website for my husband and I did a video based kind of off of the Ahmaud Arbery case.
I saw it. It's so
yeah. Thank you. And then, so we made a website. So it's anotherdayresources.com. And it just gives you all different types. But the movies, I feel like immersing yourself, how you were saying, of like good characters to like rewire the brain, I think is really good because it takes some retraining. It's not just going to happen by you saying like, I hope that when a Black person comes in that I'm okay. Like it really is going to take the effort on the white people, our part to do the work. I know we're kind of almost out of time, but I really want you to talk about before we leave, like Black trauma and how that affects, because I think it's not talked about as much, and I would love to kind of hit on that before we leave.
Sure. So, when it comes to racial trauma, it really, according to the American Psychological Association, it can be defined as whether it's a large act of violence, like a hate crime or workplace discrimination, but it can also be sort of an accumulation of smaller offenses that are experienced, again, like those microaggressions that happen continually. And what's important to know is that it can either happen to you directly or vicariously, meaning that you can experience racial trauma even if you're not the intended recipient of it. So watching Ahmaud Arbery get shot and killed, watching George Floyd die, that could be a form of racial trauma for Black and brown people watching it, even if they're not on the receiving end of the experience. What's also important to realize with racial trauma, again, it has these physiological and psychological impact, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression. We see suicidality, all those sorts of things are very much connected with it. If you want a bit of a visual, think about a soldier who's come back from war and has PTSD. A lot of the symptoms that people with PTSD diagnoses experience are exactly what people with racial trauma seem to have. And it doesn't mean that every single person of color has racial trauma, but it definitely has a higher number among people of color across varied races, Asians, Latinos, all of them, than you will find among the white community, which shows that it is a real and a valid thing. It's also important to realize that it can be intergenerational, right?
Yeah.
If you've experienced a traumatic, let's think of the Holocaust, for example. Those people endured horrors and just such terrible things. And that fundamentally changes how you are as a person. It changes your personality. It changes your values. It changes how you navigate society. It changes how you parent. Think about it. If you are a Holocaust survivor coming out of an internment camp, coming out of one of those camps that the Nazis put them in, how are you going to regard your kids? Either you may be very reserved and withdrawn because you're afraid to get attached. God forbid they get taken away. You may find yourself overly protective and involved in their lives because you don't want anything or anyone to harm them. It's going to fundamentally change how you are. And then it's going to impact how your kids are, and it's going to impact how they parent, and it's going to impact what values they hold, the lessons that you share with your kids. Like, in this family, we value education. Well, 3 generations down, it may just be a saying, but perhaps 3 generations ago, that was the only way anyone called you sir or ma'am, is if you had a degree. Otherwise, they saw you as irrelevant. So your grandfather knew we needed to make sure that we get degrees in this family in order for our humanity to be seen. And so that was a traumatic experience that has now been passed down in the way that the family culture and the family values are set. Do you know what I'm saying? So it has this way of continuing on and on and on. And again, that's not just in the words that are spoken, that's also physiological, right? The way that are the even diseases, right, that we have come down the line there. If you think about it, the high rates of hypertension among the Black and brown community, could it be that because of the stress that have been endured by before, that have been passed down and again sort of reopened with every single traumatic experience that has come in our lives since then, elevates the level of stress that we then feel and carry within our very selves? Do you know what I'm saying? So those sorts of things are the ways that we see the past impacting the present. And it's so, so important to realize that the trauma that we experience right now, it does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just impact us or the people who are immediately connected to us. It has the potential to impact those who come after us, long after we've left here. And that is what makes it so sinister and so important that we address head on.
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think that it even points out to, I think that right now, obviously police brutality is like at the height of what we're talking about, of, you know, racial issues in America. But I'm like, it is in every area of this country. You know, I think people are like, well, the police are good, you know, and I'm not saying police are good or bad. Like, that's not even a conversation to have.
It's not even like, what we're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah. I'm like, that's one aspect, and that's a huge aspect, and that's a big thing. But I'm like, they're like this, like the microaggressions, the racial trauma. Like, if we can see the bigger picture and how this is affecting education, how this affects like health, like that, if we could really understand that, like, these racial biases and prejudices are affecting people's health, like, oh, I just hope people are hearing this right now, and like tonight when they watch it, just like that, there are so many areas. This web goes so deep. Absolutely. And we have to do our part.
And if you go back to that earlier analogy of the kid jumping, imagine that kid jumping and putting like 50-pound weights on top of him as he's jumping, right? And then because a few times he's been able to look over that wall, people are saying, I don't know what your problem is. Look, you were able to look over the wall those 2 times. So it must be that the weight you're talking about and the lack of a box you're talking about can be that bad. And how do we see that in reality? We see about people saying, I don't know if you tell me if Black people have it hard. What about Oprah and LeBron James and all these famous rich people who are Black? It's like, those are the people who are able to look over the wall. But for the majority of the time, many have been unable, not because they lacked the ability to tiptoe, because they didn't have a box and a weight to put on top of them that prevented them from truly being able to look over the wall like others have been. Do you know what I'm saying? And those who have the box, no one's here to take your box away. We're just saying we want a box too. That is it. If you can have your box, you can so do it. That's fine. We love that you have a box. We're just saying everyone should have a box, and let's figure out how we can give them all a box.
Oh, amen. Seriously, amen. And I think that my biggest takeaway is for this night, I mean, there were so many, thank you for just coming on. There were so many, like, my mom and I call them like jewels. There's so many jewels of like things that I want to hold on to. But I think like the biggest takeaway of like, what is the next step? So many people are like, what do I do now? And I think how you were pointing out of like, look around you, look in your day-to-day life. Where can you use your voice and your privilege to make a change? Because you can. One person can make a little change that affects a bigger change that affects and affects and affects. Like, if we all actually do what God is calling to us, is speaking out in our circles. I think that so many people think it's so hard because like, well, I'm not around Black people, or I'm not around this. It's like, no, you have your spaces. God is calling us where we're at right now. And so I think that's just my prayer, is that we really, as the white race, do that. We actually take that action to do that. I would love to know your final thoughts of.
Absolutely. You know, I was doing a podcast interview the other day, and we are talking about neighbors, right? And what does it mean to be a good neighbor? And I was saying that a good neighbor is being able to see that, to recognize that you can't live in peace unless that person next to you is living in peace as well, right? Okay. Being a good neighbor is being able to recognize that you know the frustration of missing the Amazon delivery guy, so you take the package because you don't want to feel the stress that comes with it, right? Like, recognizing that regardless of where our property lines end, that again, your happiness and your ability to live comfortably is so connected to that other person living comfortably, and therefore it is in your best interest that everyone has the opportunity to do that. And so when we think of it in this holistic way, it's not, again, you going in to save Black people from racism. It's not you having to, you know, make do penance for waking up white. Like, no, none of that is necessary. What is necessary is recognizing, wow, I live in a society that devalues people because of the color of their skin, and because of the color of my skin, I am valued, and I'm going to use that value to make sure that I'm creating more equity around me. I am going to ask questions. I'm going to speak up. Gentrification is a huge thing that happens. And someone was asking me, well, what if you're a white person moving into, Black and brown community that is being gentrified? And again, you're just trying to get a house. Like, you're not trying to displace anybody, do anything wrong. What should you not move into what do you do? And I was saying, because you're a person of value, and you're a person that society sees as, we want more of you, we want you, rather than thinking, you know what, I can afford to pay this $3,000 rent for this ridiculously overpriced apartment, therefore I will go ahead and do it. You can recognize, well, 2 years ago, this same apartment was worth $1,500. So you say to this landlord, I will not pay that ridiculous price for this apartment. I will pay you $1,700. And because you have value and you have power and they want your business, and if enough of you say we're not paying that, regardless of our ability to afford it, guess what's going to happen to those housing prices? They're going to be re-regulated. And so everybody is going to be able to stay. When before, because you were like, well, it has nothing to do with me, I'm just paying what I can afford. Well, you're getting ripped off too, and who doesn't want it?
Yeah, who doesn't want a good deal?
So using your voice in that way
so good
helps you as well as it helps the neighborhood. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not. So I'm all about integration. I'm all about bringing people together. It's the heart of what I do with my company and in my clinical practice. So I'm definitely not interested in a segregationist idea of, you stay over there, you stay here. But what I am saying is, if your voice is considered more valuable than others, then it's up to you, and you have a responsibility to use that voice to make sure that others who are not being valued are treated fairly or treated justly. And just because you can afford it doesn't mean you should have it. I think that's good economics, and it's good anti-racist work. Just because you can afford to pay, to attend, to do this thing doesn't mean that you should, if it comes at the expense of so many others.
That's so good. Yeah, we can all have a box to stand on. I think that's the image, and the final thing is, like, we all can have it, and we can help the other people build their box, right? I think that's the work that we have to do. I'm so thankful that I know that now I feel like I know you even more, but I'm just so thankful that you came on and shared your wealth of knowledge. I mean, I could spend hours talking about all this. I think that God is calling us all to step up. And so I'm just so thankful. I know that you've had so many of these over the last couple of weeks, and I know this is like your heart for like this, but I know that it takes effort. I know that it takes, your energy and your heart and your mind. And so we're just so thankful. I know that this is happening for a reason. So once again, thank you. And
absolutely.
We'll stay in touch.
And for everyone watching, please know that the race talk that's happening on Saturday is free, and you're welcome to join on it. It's a limited in terms of space. So
I printed it out, but then it got cut off. But this is it.
That's awesome. So it's free. There is a limit on space, so I really encourage you to register as soon as you can. It's going to be a great night. And I look forward to seeing everybody.
I'll share that on my Instagram feed as well, and I'll share it to a couple people.
Thank
you so much. Have a good night.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.